years ago, black folk got the right to vote. You're not in any moral position to tell anybody how corrupt they are. You should be quiet.
I think in general, women, have to deal with not being believed, but we have a whole other layer because people are socialized to believe that black girls are lying.
Because while I was working on those streets, watching those folks see their jobs shipped overseas, you were a corporate lawyer sitting on the board of Walmart.
We as black people don't need an apology in this nation. What we need is what was promised to us. They promised us after slavery 40 acres and a mule. We never got it.
Good evening, Great Debate League. We appreciate you for being with us tonight. My name is Professor AJ, and I'll be your moderator and host for this evening's debate. I hope you can stay with us to the end as we rely on your vote to determine the winner. Tonight's debate is brought to you by Black History Travel. For more information on Black History Travel, visit their Facebook page. Our debate topic for this evening is: what is racism and who can be racist? It is a common understanding that racism has been directed by whites to non-whites historically. The inability of blacks to impose systemic oppression on whites has prompted calls for improved definitions on the term. Furthermore, this has resulted in many black scholars asserting that blacks cannot be racist. Tonight's premise, the appropriate definition of racism must exclude black peoples as perpetrators. Tonight's guiding definition, a definition that adequately describes the phenomenon of racism as experienced by people on a day-to-day basis. The term black people means black or people of African descent throughout the African diaspora. The pre-debate arguments. Both participants will be sharing their own definitions of racism and racist in order to justify it as the most appropriate. According to the affirmations position, Kenny Mac Barnes, a resident of Chicago, Illinois, he is self-taught Pan-Africanist. Barnes works at the University of Chicago Hospital as a material specialist and union steward. In addition, he is developing a nonprofit organization that addresses homelessness. Arguing the negative position, Dr. Bruce Strobel, a resident of Tallahassee, Florida, by way of Pasadena, California. Throughout his professional life, Strobel has focused on advocacy and education in African American communities with the goal of improving their capacity to become more sustainable and resilient. Among many other noteworthy roles, he is the founding member of the Citizens for a Sustainable Future and the sustainability coordinator for the city of Tallahassee. This is a ranked debate. There will be no personal attacks of any kind, no profanity, no interrupting. Round one is opening statements. Both participants will be allowed to present their opening statement uninterrupted for 4 minutes. We will begin with Kenny Barnes arguing the affirmative and Bruce Strobel arguing the negative. Rebuttals. Each debater has 1 minute and 1.5 minutes to address the statement made by the opponent's opening statement. Okay? All right, are we ready, gentlemen?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Barnes, it's on you.
All right, so, in my opening statement, I want y'all to understand something first. There would be no concept of race if it wasn't for the European. Racism, none of that even existed until they made it a thing. And when they made it a thing, they made us a thing. They made everything a thing, something a thing. I think what the working definition you got to take from that is, I got it written down here. Culturally sanctioned beliefs, regardless of intentions, involved to defend the advantages whites have because of the subordinate position of racial minorities. That's Wellman, 1993. That was his definition of racism. These other people, man, I can't even pronounce their name. I'm not gonna lie to you. A highly organized system of race-based group privileges that operates at every level of society and is held together by a sophisticated ideology of color, race, and supremacy. You got to understand that racism is a team sport. There's no way one person individually can be a racist. It's a team sport. It doesn't work with one person. It's a team effort that advantages that team. If you don't play as a team, you will lose by default. You can't be a racist by yourself. And if you take anything away from this, from tonight, that's basically what I want everybody to take away from this, is that racism is a team sport. You can't do it alone. And there's no way that black people can be racist. Is that my time?
Is it time for me to go? All right. Good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to say we need justice for Breonna Taylor immediately. Historically, non-white perspectives were marginalized in the process of defining words. This in itself is a racist act and an act of racism, and I'll explain that more in detail later in this debate. Words matter and they have meaning. An appropriate definition must be descriptive of what people mean when they use the term. To determine the most appropriate definition of racism or racist, we have to look at what people mean when they are actually experiencing this. When people say, I'm experiencing racism, or that was racist, what are they actually trying to convey? Racism is most appropriately defined as the ideologies and procedures that create and or maintain racial inequality and also distribute social privileges based on phenotype. Now, my opponent, Kenny, and his supporters who put him in this situation continue to mystify the concept of racism by reducing it to a system with no actors. This is illogical and it is foolish. Systems are merely arrangements of social interactions. Social interactions are routinely carried out at the individual level. Thus, a plethora of race scholars across academia, as well as activists, generally break down racism into at least 3 or 4 categories. We have at the macro analytic level, institutional and structural racism, which I'll explain throughout this debate. You also have at the micro analytic level, personally mediated and internalized racism. These are all aspects of racism that together create what we refer to as the system of racism, which is not to be simply conflated with each individual aspect of racism. Now, while I agree with my opponent that African Americans as a collective cannot, in their current social arrangement, practice racism against whites due to historical and established power imbalances, they can, however, be practitioners of racism against non-whites, especially those with less power. So throughout this debate, I intend to explain why a more appropriate definition of racism must be based on historical and contemporary experiences of the phenomena. It is evident that actors at different levels make decisions that carry out actions that have deleterious impacts on non-whites. Black people can and do play a role, what some call de facto or proxy racism. This is to say that when a Black person assumes a position of authority in a racist system, they can and do participate in the allowed set of social interactions that have negative impacts on non-white people. This is by definition racism. In order to maintain logical consistency in the definition, the primary premise must remain true even if whenever the variables are consistent. Therefore, skin color alone is irrelevant. It does not change one's ability. Therefore, it is not a relevant qualifier of what is and what is not racist. So when we look at race relations in the world today, what do we see? Increasing social inequality for non-whites, privileges awarded to specific groups if they support white interests, increased privilege for whites. And these are the characteristics that I found across a range of academic studies and in my own personal research with activists and African Americans and other people of color across this country. So how did we get to this point? White people established a system of social interactions that afforded them and their people privileges and placed unjust burdens on non-whites. Within this system, individual actors use racial violence, racial bigotry, race-based prejudice, and race-based discrimination to advance the system and, in many cases, their own individual interests. This is what we refer to as personally mediated racism. Now, in modern times, we might call this microaggressions. These are small, but not small in their size, but more so they happen at the microanalytic level. The perpetrators of these microaggressions could be any race, mine, yours, white, black, Asian, it does not matter.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Strobel. Unfortunately, you ran out of time. We will allow Mr. Kenny Barnes to rebuke your opening statement. Mr. Barnes.
I mean, yeah, y'all heard it. I give it to Bruce, man. I really like Bruce. I really do, man. Like, you know what I'm saying? I feel like he came from where we came from. But I mean, man, it's just sitting real heavy on my heart when you say things like we could be racist. Like, it's like I don't think that you really understand what a racist is and how those correlate, like the correlations of calling black people racist when we all know that white people are racist. We know that Hitler was a racist. We know that we know that George Zimmerman's a racist. You know what I mean? We know that the cops are racist. I mean, most of them, if not all of them. But I guess, I mean, how is it? Do you think? How is it that we exactly, like, give me a current example of like a black guy or woman being racist and advancing, you know what I'm saying, in some way, somehow, due to racism.
Thank you. My opponent, first, two things he said. You heard him say cops are racist. Not all cops, Kenny, are white men or white women. There are plenty of black officers, which I've heard you plenty of times say that you believe there could be no such thing as a good cop because cops represent a system of racism. Correct, Kenny? Therefore, if a cop is carrying out racist orders, he is practicing racism, white or black. Moving forward, you said to give you a contemporary example of a black person being racist. Let's look at, we can look at Candace Owens, for example, right? She went on national television and said that Native Americans were savages until they were civilized by white Christians. This is promoting, people believed her, people listened to her. This influenced future people who are going to make decisions that impact the lives of not only Native Americans, but of other people of color. This is what we mean by racism. It is when you carry out actions that have a deleterious impact on a racial group. So a black person can continue those actions. Thank you.
Okay, we will move to the second round in our debate. The second round of our debate is a question and answer. We'll have 3 questions selected from the online audience as they submit the questions. Each debater has 30 seconds to respond, uninterrupted. Okay? The first question is, if all cops are racist and some cops are black, wouldn't that make those black cops racist?
Okay, so my thing is with the all cops are racist, and Bruce, you know, I say that all the time. All cops are racist. It doesn't matter what color you are. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, you're not advancing your own interests. You're just being stupid and you're being selfish and you don't know it. See, my thing is, like I said, racism is a team sport, and racism, whatever it is, it's a tool, and that tool is used to build the social, political, economic, build his house. That's not being racist. That's being stupid. What are you doing? He doesn't care about you.
Thank you, Kenny. I really feel that was in support of my argument. you're arguing that racism is a tool. The tool itself could be apprehended and utilized and wielded by anyone. But where I agree with you is that it's used to build up another racist structure. Now, that's not to say that certain races have not used racism to get their own unique advantages within that system, right? So it works as a hierarchy. It's not only you're stuck in what we call the black-white binary, but there are other people in the world besides black and white who could be victims or perpetrators.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Our next question.
Oh.
What is the truth that we need to understand about racism?
Can I go first?
Yes, sir. You will go first.
I got this one first. Listen, the truth about racism is that there is no skin color exception. You are racist or you are anti-racist. Choose a side. We cannot allow to let people off who work against us and work against other people of color, other black, other native, other Latino people because they have different colored skin. There is no skin color exclusion. Racist or anti-racist. That is it.
I think that in America, Bruce has a worldly expanded version of racism or definition of racism that I have. In America, racism in America is white supremacy. That's what it is. So when you talk about racism in America, you're talking about white supremacy. They're the majority. As long as they just wake up and do what they got to do, you know what I mean? They're just keeping it going. And when we do it, we're detaching ourselves from ourselves. So it's kind of like joining the military and voluntarily letting yourself off being the black shield. You know what I mean? And I don't know no other way to put it, but like I said.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Barnes. Unfortunately, the time is up. We got one more question that we're going to ask. Okay. The question is, how do we move forward? Mr. Barnes, you're first.
Moving forward, I mean, you have to have these difficult conversations, even if you have, you know what I'm saying, good white friends. Sometimes we have to just have those difficult conversations with our friends and our family about the things that we wake up and do every day and the way that the world is going. America is founded off of slave blood, stolen land, you know what I mean, murder, corruption. This is a terrible place. I mean, I'm not that much of a religious person, but the prophecies are correct. I mean, this place will burn.
Dr. Strobel?
Racism must be uprooted and fought on every front. We cannot turn away from it. That means we have to face internalized racism. We have to defend ourselves from personally mediated racism, and we must work with every ally and anyone who is willing to tear down and dismantle structural and systemic racism. Every front, we must take it, we must challenge it, and we must be unrelenting in this process. Where we work, where we live, where we go to school, and how we treat ourselves and our families, we need to confront racism everywhere it rears its head.
Thank you, Dr. Strobel. Okay, now we're going to move on to our lightning round, right? The lightning round, the debaters are allowed to directly engage in cross-examination of their opponent in non-structured conversation. The debaters use their preferential time as to ask questions. Opponents should be able to completely respond. Okay. We will allow for Mr. Barnes to go first in the lightning round. Excuse me, in the lightning round. This is non-structured conversation or non-structured cross-examination of your opponent, Mr. Barnes. You're first.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right. So, Bruce, what led you to, you know what I mean, the idea that we could possibly be racist? Not saying I even agree with you right now.
When I was doing my research for my dissertation, I came across a couple who I was interviewing, and they told me that they had been attacked by racist cops. And at the time, I held the same idea that you had, the cultural idea that Black people under no circumstances could be racist. So when they were describing the attack to me, they mentioned Black and white officers both assaulting them. And I started to try to tell them, well, those Black officers weren't racist. and they said they were doing the same things that the white officers were doing. What is the difference? And at that point, as I started to look at at definitions of racism, I started to see where nowhere did anyone specifically exclaim that Black people cannot be racist. They outline what racism is and what it does and what the results are. And I said, well, if you look at that with the logical analysis, if a person does A, B, and C, and the results are D, E, and F, and that equals racism, skin color is not a factor in this. So that's how I came to that position. And the more I looked at it, the more I read, it only made sense that an African person or a Black person who's participating in supporting and upholding white supremacy himself is a racist. And the only way to not be racist was to be anti-racist.
I think that's given the proposition that people like know what even racism is. I mean, I've talked to a few cops and they don't know what's going on. But my thing is like,
consciousness.
I think the issue that we're having here is that when we, you started off absolutely correct about, what I'm saying, words having meanings and stuff like that. And it reminds me of like when I used to read the old slave literature, how even, what I'm saying, the Blacks of that time would describe other Black people as like savages. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like how I feel like right now, like you're calling us a racist. I don't think it's like intentional or you're doing this in any way to harm us. But I think if I could ask them anything, it would be the same question I ask you. Is it, is it hurtful to just look at us like, with a little understanding that we're reacting to a system of racism that was thrown on top of us? You know what I mean? We've never had that time to.
And so are so many other people. That's what you're failing to recognize. No one alive right now created this system of racism, but everyone who is partaking in maintaining it is a problem. So everyone, it doesn't matter your skin color. If you are upholding the system of racism, you must be challenged. You must be stopped because it's resulting in loss of life. We're talking about people who live in poverty because of their skin color. We're talking about people who will die at an early age.
Those are the people you're calling racist.
Must be challenged.
Those are the people you're calling racist. Think about that. Like I said, when you look at it, I understand some white people, like when I've had white friends who, at the time when I didn't know what I know now, they would take me out to their house in Hoffman Estates, and they just never really looked at a color situation. It wasn't until like I graduated, I left some of those schools, and looking back at it, it was racist. Looking back at it with retrospective eyes, it was. But at the same time, I can't deny that. That's who I am now. Mm-hmm. Just looking at the situation as a whole, my life like just changed, and the idea that the people who are reacting to the oppression, who getting beat up by the police officers and who being miseducated, who are being like basically starved and just fed the worst food.
But see, that's not what I'm talking about, Kenny. I'm talking about, for example, let's use the Cherokee Nation, for example. The Cherokee at one point, they owned slaves. They adopted a republic system very similar to the United States. They actually owned slaves, just like any other area in Georgia. Meaning, if you were a Black person and the Cherokee apprehended you, you were enslaved. So,
okay. I would agree with you on that. But
okay, so then what we're talking about is this is racism, where it does not necessarily have to be a white person doing the enslavement here. This is still racism. It still has the same impacts that white racism had, right? But it's a part of the. So now go further. Let's come to the future. The Cherokee Nation several years ago forcefully removed the African American members of the tribe so that they can have benefits amongst their group. This is what you just described as racism in your definition. Do you not definition? So trying to protect Black people only mystifies the concept and then allow people to say, well, we had Black people with us, so it wasn't racist. This is stupid.
You also missed the definition. I said it's a team sport. You can't do it alone. You know what I'm saying? So like you're talking about the Cherokee Nation. That's a group of people, and they enforce their own laws in the way that they said that they were going to do things. But when Black people, you don't see a group of Black people out there saying, well, this is how it's going to get done, and nobody's going to tell us that you can't do it this way. But that's racism. That's racism. When we say it's going to be done for us, for this color people, and we don't care how you feel about it. That's basically how everybody else plays the game. For us to play it any other type of way, it's wrong. It's not racism. It's something else. And when you play it against yourself, it's stupid at that point. I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's racism. I think what you're describing can be well identified as, have you ever heard of menticide? Mental genocide of a people.
Right and menticide, yes.
You see, so I look at it that way. If you were to approach, you know what I'm saying, any of our behavior from white folks' perspective is crazy. And I think that's what really did it for me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just looking at black people's behavior and what we have to go through from a regular psychology book. It's not even, it's unbelievable. You know what I mean? Some of the things that we go through, you know, the PTSD, everything.
So, Kenny, I remember I saw something on your Facebook page. You said that Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, that it changed your life, right?
Yes, it did.
I think you might have missed the part in the book where she talked about how systems of control can evolve over time, and they have to adjust and adapt. This is living systems theory. Systems have to change. They become manipulated so that they could survive in new social arrangements. Racism is not what it was when it originally started, right? Meaning that it does not. Everyone doesn't benefit from racism. In fact, most white people will not receive all the benefits that some white people receive from racism. And I'm here to tell you that there are some black people that if they support the system of racism, they will receive benefits at the expense of the rest of us. When we look at it as a collective human race, racism is a wasteful use of human resources. Who knows how much further human society could be if there was no racism? So who's actually benefiting? You're taking the European construct of material and using that as the basis to say that only whites are going to win in this system, when in actuality, no one is winning. It's setting us all back. Every white, black, Latino, and Asian human being on the planet is set back by racism, whether they're conscious of it or not. And you need to understand that.
I mean, I understand, but it's due to their own greed. It's their own greed that fuels that engine.
For blacks
and so my question is, do you think racism in America could exist without white people?
Yes, absolutely. It would just go along some other kind of line where without white people, another group would rise to a spot where they would say, we are dominant and here are our policies and this is what happens. And then people will fall in line. Unless we dismantle racism, it will not go away. It will continue to adjust.
I don't see that happening. I don't think there's a concrete.
You're not paying attention, sir. Because if you go to other countries where there are not numerous white people, they still have the same colorist racial issues. So
and that's because white supremacy is global now. White supremacy is global. You have to understand that 5% of the population, 5% of the world's population owns majority of the world's wealth. And that's ridiculous when you think about like who's controlling the invisible hand here. You're just paying attention to the puppets, and I'm trying to get you to look at the strings. There are strings being pulled all around here. You know what I'm saying? So when you can look at Africa, like for example, in Chicago, I grew up in Chicago. We were poor. It's segregated as hell here, or as heck. I'm sorry. And I mean, miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of black folks, and it's no white people ever. You know what I'm saying? I didn't see a white person until I went downtown, and I was a teenager. And it was crazy to me. You know, you see them on TV, but like still, even if you never see a white person, you know what I mean? Me growing up in the ghetto, impoverished in bogus schools, you know, that's a situation of racism, of what I was born into. And that, you know what I'm saying? The black people that did play a role in that were just doing that, playing a role, but they weren't directing the script. It's just like every other system.
That does not NBA. That doesn't excuse anyone, Kenny, whether you're conscious or unconscious. That is from the definition you provided. And I want you to go back and look at the definition you provided from the author of the ISIS papers, right? You provided her definition. Yes, Dr. Wilson. Yeah. You provided her definition, conscious or unconscious.
Yeah.
Dr. Strobel, it's your turn to cross-examine Mr. Barnes.
All right. So, Kenny, why do you think that as soon as someone's skin color changes, that their actions can no longer be classified as racism? That's what I'm trying to get you to see, the error of your ways, that the skin color changes and now you're no longer racist. But if you were white, it would be racist.
I think that, and I've said this before, we just need a new language when we decide to talk about, you know what I'm saying, ourselves. It's like Malcolm X said, we could be sitting down at the table talking with white folks and they be talking about something totally different. When they say give me war or give me liberty or give me freedom or give me death, it means something different to us. You know what I mean? When we say it, when we say something, it has different meanings. We can't refer to each other in terms that they give us. The terms that they give us, like criminals and thugs and misfits, we can't accept those labels that they just throw at us, because these are the labels that they provide us with. That's why I think that, you know what I mean. It's just that when we do something, it's different. You know what I mean. I'm not trying to say like we're special or something like that, but you got to understand, we don't come from the same decision making skills that white people come from. So to judge us, like even the riots that was going on, I wasn't a part of that, but I didn't judge them, because like I understand that you as a white person, you may look at that and call them all type of names, but I don't see it that way. You know what I mean? That's just something else for me.
You still seem to be trapped in this black-white binary, Kenny, as if black and white are the only two people on the planet. When we know there's there's other groups involved that you continue to discount from your analysis, and that's what weakens your position ultimately. And what you have
this is my thing.
Go ahead.
This is my thing with black and white. I'm black and it's white supremacy. Okay. I don't too much care about the Asians. I can boycott that. I don't eat that stuff too much anyway. The Arabs, you know what I mean? I can limit my access with them since they own all the convenience stores. But for the most part, it's black and white because, like I said, it's white supremacy. I work at the University of Chicago. I see it every day. It's terrible. It's horrible. For as a black man, you know what I'm saying? Being a black man and walking down those halls, and you see in 1958 the graduating class is all white dudes. Mm-hmm. That's 1958. You know what I'm saying? We ain't just get here. Where were we at? What were we doing? You know what I mean? And so, like, that's what I mean when I say, you know what I'm saying, white supremacy. That is the enemy. We can, you know what I'm saying, sit if y'all want to.
Now, here we are aligned. White supremacy is the enemy. And so are all the operatives who practice, promote, teach, and expand white supremacy. And I do not care about their skin color, Kenny. That's where me and you are different. You're willing to give passes to people and say, he's a white supremacist. He's out killing and actively destroying black communities, but he's black. So I'm going to give him a pass. I'm saying, no, this is a racist.
I'm not saying
he's properly identified, and now I know he's not on our side. Racist or anti-racist.
I see, and that's the thing. Like, I'm not automatically giving them a pass, you know. Please don't get that from me. You know what I mean? Those type of guys, they're the worst type of people. And I mean, I align with you there. When I talk to them, I do describe them as racist. I tell them they acting just like the Klan. You know what I mean? But I understand, because this is not because
it was no purpose in us having. If you feel that way, it was really no purpose in us having this debate. Because if you describe them as racist, then we're on the same page, and
they're operating from a marginalized mindset, though. You're not. You can't describe this. This is the problem that I'm having, because, like I said, just like you throwing definitions at them, like they had a clean slate to decide whether or not they was going to do something about it. They were marginalized from the jump. They were told from the jump that this is who you are, and they accepted who they are. We are from the ghetto. We are thugs.
Here's where you're making a mistake. You're assuming that all the people I'm talking about are from the ghetto. There are black people who are properly educated, who made conscious decisions or unconscious decisions to be against other people who are not white because they saw benefits in it for themselves. That is racism.
You mentioned Candace Owens earlier. I don't think Candace Owens is a racist. I think she's stupid. I think she's a dodo bird. I think I need to stop listening to her. She has no power at that point. White people could take her, and I guarantee you this: the real white supremacist is not finished. She's going to be caught in that middle area where she
has more influence than a white supremacist like Richard Spencer. You see what I'm saying?
She has so?
Yes. He's marginalized. He's on the extremities of white supremacy. She's mainstream white supremacy and racism, and she promotes it, and they will continue to reward her as long as she promotes their system. And that's why I'm saying we have to identify her as what she is. She is a black racist.
But like, look at these rewards that she's getting. They're all materialistic. They'll never really accept her in. They'll never really accept her in. And that's the thing about it. Like I said, it comes down to that metaphor that we was just talking about you picking the tools up to build their house. I don't think that that's racism. I think it's just stupid. It's just stupid. Like, I don't know. Like I said, the thing with Bobby Wright, what he gave me was a different understanding on language and how words have intentions and meanings and backgrounds and all of that. And we can't. The number one mistake we make is that Black scholars, we identify Black behavioral phenomenon with white definitions, and that's what we make our mistake. We can't take their definitions that were made for them and begin to over criticize and analyze our own situation.
I agree. And that's why I don't use the dictionary definition of racism. The definition I have taken has been crafted by multiple Black scholars, from Francis Cress Welsing to Eduardo Bonilla Sevilla to Kendi Ibram, and so forth. Like, there are Michelle Alexander, all the scholars who write on race. This is what I spent 20 years studying. So I didn't just pull this out the sky. I've looked at their definitions. I looked at Tawanda Greer, who did this validation of the schedule of racist events. I looked at Hope Landrin as well, and Elizabeth Klonos, right? They did the schedule of racist events. What they did was document people's racist experiences, how it impacted them. Now, this is what I want you to understand. People were reporting that they experienced this amount of racist experience, and then she was able to match it to their stress level, right? To say when people experience racism, they experience this much stress. What no one noted was to say, well, when a Black person did this, I didn't experience stress. When a white person did it, I did. That never happened. What they said was, when I had experiences like this, that were racial experiences, it caused a certain reaction. This is empirical evidence of how racism impacts Black bodies. And the perpetrator of it, white or Black, does not matter.
I mean, it's a good argument. It's a good argument for them to use. You got to think about the implications.
You're too worried about what white people are going to think and not worried about the result of dismantling racism. If we can't talk freely and call things what they actually are, we cannot deal with them. So this idea that we can sit here and scoot around it and say, well, you do racist things, but I'm not going to call you a racist. It's foolishness. That's the only way I could classify it, because we have to be direct. By any means necessary, we have to destroy this system. That means we have to identify every participant, label them, and say these people are our opponents, and we must work against them, no matter what their skin color is. They must be stopped.
I mean, like I said, Bruce, I don't think I have too much of an argument for you here. This is a good idea, but I mean, it's gonna take some getting used to. It's gonna take some reading. You're gonna have to give me something to read on this.
I got you. It's plenty of reading. You could start with my dissertation. I see a question somebody asked, what power do we have to be racist, right? And this is where it gets tricky, because power is relative, right? Power is relative. So power is relative to the scenario. So it depends on what country you're in, what space you're in, what time you're in, and who you're talking about. We may not have as much power as white people, but we may be able to have access to the residuals of being next to our proxy to a white power structure that allows us to oppress other people. And I see it happen all the time. And we have to be honest about this. Our failure to admit this is going to hold us back and stop us from being able to destroy and dismantle systemic racism and white supremacy around the planet.
I think that's where I find it difficult. That it's like, because I don't believe that racism would exist without white people. I mean, it started off with white people. It changed the world. It took a concept that probably did exist, probably didn't exist beforehand, and made it a dangerous tool of genocide. And I've never seen us practice that. I've never seen Black people practice a form of racism, even down to Tulsa. That wasn't true racism. I mean, it was good. It was Black. It was capitalism.
Listen to me, Kenny. In the words of Tupac, they say it's the white man I should fear, but it's my own kind doing all the killing here. Yeah. You hear me?
Yeah.
All right. This Black people become tools or vessels of racism.
Okay, gentlemen. That was very interesting. We're going to move on to the closing arguments. Each debater will be allowed 2.5 minutes uninterrupted to make their closing arguments. We're going to go ahead with Mr. Kenny Mack first.
All right. So basically, out of tonight's debate, which I didn't feel like it was going to be a real debate from the jump, because Bruce has a whole 20 years behind like his theory that's just leaving my mind open to like the avenues that he's trying to take this in. So I think what I do want to leave y'all with As my closing sentiments, I do still only believe that Black people cannot be racist. We react to racism. Some further readings, if you want to get into it, something that changed me, get this book right here. Even the Rat Was White. And I mean, it did a different change, you know what I'm saying? It really dived into the mind of like European psychology and their use on definitions and their damages on our Black minds. So y'all get in tune with that. Also, intellectual warfare. This is what every Black scholar should have. This is what everybody should be reading. So those two I want to leave y'all with. Intellectual warfare and Even the Rat Was White.
I'm up. Okay. So imagine you're listening to a radio show and the personality says, Black people are genetically inferior. Therefore, we need to pass new legislation that prevents them from having the same rights as white people. The listeners of this show, they go out accordingly. They begin to work the next day to take extreme measures that harm Black people collectively. Is the radio personality spewing racism? I think most of you would say yes, right? You would say yes. They have become a spokesperson for racism. Does it matter if you change their skin color? That's what we're here to discuss today. Does simply changing someone's skin color absolve them of racial or racist actions? Again, you must remember, racists are those who participate in systems that create and maintain racial inequality and white supremacy. The only way you cannot be racist is to be anti-racist. There is no skin color exception. Now, when I talk about racism, I want to make it clear. I'm not talking about random acts of bigotry, prejudice, or discrimination. Instead, we're talking about the aggregation of multiple actions that contribute to oppression and continued disparity of non-dominant groups while creating and maintaining privilege for the dominant group based on their phenotype. And remember, phenotype is just a set of observable characteristics of individuals resulting from their interactions of their genotype with the environment. That could be your hair color, its texture, eye, nose, or body shape. All those things are your phenotype. It's way deeper than skin color. In 100 years, the majority of the United States citizens will not be white. However, there's no indication that the system of racism will yield in any way. If we fail to eradicate racism, it will allow for non-whites, including
Dr. Strobel, I'm sorry you went over time. I appreciate you for participating. I want to say thank you to Dr. Strobel. I want to say thank you to Mr. Kinney for participating in the Great Debate League. I want to thank the audience for watching. Please donate to our Cash App so we can continue to grow. We will post a Facebook poll on the Great Debate League group page. Please go there and vote. The poll will be up for 24 hours after the debate. Good night, everyone. We invite you to join us to the post-debate analysis in a few moments. Thank you.